and welcome to Microsoft Mechanics. Coming up, if you're considering the benefits of moving your on-premises VMware or Hyper-V workloads to the cloud, we'll take a look at how Azure Migrate helps you discover and assess your Windows and Linux VMs all without agents. Then, migrate your workloads at scale and optimize them for production. And what's more, you can also use the Azure Hybrid benefit for Windows Server to use your existing Windows Server licenses in Azure and lower your costs by up to 49%. And if you're still running Windows Server 2008 or 2008 R2 VMs, and I know a few of you are, moving them to Azure gives you extended security updates until 2023. Now, if you're weighing your migration options and approach for moving your workloads to the cloud, check out our cloud adoption framework at aka.ms/CAF. It's a set of tools and guidance to help develop your migration strategy, including organizational readiness. Also, if you're currently using VMware and migrating to Azure, there are now two main options for migration: the Azure VMware Solution and Azure Migrate. Azure VMware Solution allows you to provision a native VMware environment running in Azure. Here, you get dedicated, isolated Azure bare metal infrastructure to create native VMware cloud environments on Azure. Azure VMware Solution is great for bulk migration in a short period of time. For example, when retiring a data center, while using the same VMware toolset and expertise you already have. Check out aka.ms/mechanicsavs to see how to get this up and running. And if you want to see a demo of vMotion from on-premises using HCX into an Azure VMware instance, check out aka.ms/mechanicsHCX. Now, Azure Migrate is the other way, and that's what we're going to focus on today. Azure Migrate is great for driving more compute efficiency, the flexibility to right-size your infrastructure on demand, and dramatically save costs in the long term by running your VMs in native Azure IaaS. Now, if you haven't looked at Azure Migrate in a while, or the last time you did was my earlier Mechanics how-to, this is a major upgrade. We've added the migration-specific tools that were previously only in Azure Site Recovery, and now offer both Microsoft and partner tools for assessment and migration that you can track centrally from Azure Migrate. Now, for starters, we've simplified the workflow, added new partner tools, and sped up the process. And I'm excited to show you. So let's go ahead and get started. First, we'll make sure our prerequisites are in place and both environments have the right permissions needed. Then, we'll set up an Azure Migrate project, including the tools we want to use for assessment and migration. This is followed by setting up our assessment by downloading a VM appliance to discover what's running in my VMware environment. Next, we'll review Azure Migrate's assessment with dependencies and scope our target migration. Then we'll move into the migration, which starts with replicating our virtual machines from VMware into IaaS, following by testing to make sure everything works before we finally switch our virtual machines into production. Now, of course, there are some prereqs to get started, and I'm going to walk you through them. First, you'll need an Azure subscription, and there are a number of offers that you can take advantage of to get started at little to no cost. As I mentioned, you'll need to make sure that the right permissions are set up in Azure so that your virtual machine logs can be sent to the cloud and eventually replicate virtual machines into Azure storage. You can find more guidance on how to set this up at aka.ms/VMware Prereqs. That's Prereqs. Since I'm going to be using vSphere, let me first show you the VMs we want to migrate into Azure. As you can see, I have an application that consists of multiple virtual machines in 3 tiers: a web front end, an app tier, and a database tier. By the way, if you're using Windows Server Hyper-V, we of course have the tools to migrate your Hyper-V VMs as well. But in this case, we're going to walk through the VMware process. So we'll go back to the Azure portal and use Azure Migrate. I'm going to go ahead and click on Azure Migration Tools. This service gives you assessment and migration tools from both Microsoft and our migration partners that you can monitor progress across all running projects and tools. An assessment will help find on-premises VMs and application environments and assess them for migration to Azure, then replicate into Azure storage and migrate them into production. Here, you'll see options to assess and migrate servers, databases, web apps, and virtual desktop infrastructure. In my case, I'm going to click on Assess and Migrate Servers, which will work for both Windows and Linux servers. Now, by clicking on Add Tools, it will start a wizard-based process to help you select the assessment and migration tools you want to use if this is your first time here. I'll start by choosing my subscription. Next, creating a new resource group. So let's go to give this a name, and now choose my geography. This is pretty standard stuff. Now, we're simply going to click on Next. In the Select Assessment tool, you'll see a list of our partner tools from Cloudimize, Corent Tech, Device42, and more. We have multiple great partner options in case you have partners helping you with your migration and want to choose one of these great options. In this case, I'm going to choose the Azure Migrate Server Assessment and click on Next. Now, I'm going to select the Azure Migrate Server Migration and click Next, where it will show me a summary of my selections to review. At this point, we've simply chosen our assessment and migration tools. I'm going to click on Add Tools, which adds these tools to my Azure Migrate project. If I decide I want to add an additional assessment tool, no problem. I can do that in this very next step. And you can see my deployment has exceeded, and I have my assessment tools. If I decide I want to add an additional assessment tool, no problem. I'm going to click here to add more assessment tools. In this case, I'll select Movir as an example and click Add Tool. Now back on the Azure Migrate home, I'll see the tools I just selected, and I'll click Discover in the Server Assessment. At the top, we see a radio button with options to discover using Appliance or import using CSV. I'm going to use the default Appliance option. Now the next drop-down lets me choose between VMware vSphere and Hyper-V. Now this information is used to choose the appropriate Azure Migrate appliance, as well as to use right-sized VMs in Azure. Since we're doing VMware, I'm choosing VMware vSphere Hypervisor. Now, I need to download an Azure Migrate appliance. The Azure Migrate appliance is a complete, pre-configured Open Virtual Appliance, or OVA, that you'll import into vSphere. Now these are platform-specific appliances that run on your infrastructure and discover the virtual machines you specify, along with their attributes and performance metrics. Now I've already downloaded this appliance, so let's move to the next step. Now, I need to set up the appliance in my vSphere environment. So I'll just click File, Deploy the OVF template. Now I'm going to browse to the OVA file I just downloaded, select that, and go through the normal VM deployment process. Once that's done, I'm going to log into the Azure Migrate appliance, and this is running in the ESX environment where I can set up discovery for Azure Migrate and where we'll kick off the discovery of our on-premises environment. Now keep in mind that this is a read-only inspection of your VMs and their metadata, including performance history. There are no agents installed in your VM. When you first launch the Azure Migrate Appliance tool, you'll be asked to go through a few primary steps. Step 1, set up the prerequisites. Here it's going to prompt you to accept the terms, check that you are connected to the internet, make sure that your time is in sync with the internet time server, and it checks if a current version of VMware vSphere Virtual Disk Development Kit is installed. If not, you can download it or let it verify and install automatically for you. As you can see, we've made the process very straightforward. And just like that, I'm going to go ahead and move along and hit Continue. Now, step 2 is to register with Azure Migrate. Now, we covered this topic earlier in the prerequisites, so we can view the assessment logs. As a reminder, you can see more at aka.ms/VMware Prereqs. That's Prereqs. Step 3 is to specify Vcenter server. Now, under Virtual Machine Discovery, here's where you provide administrator credentials for the Vcenter server for the read-only discover of your machines. Simply enter the IP, username and password, and then validate the connection. And we're successful. Step 4 is to discover apps and dependencies. Now, discovery of apps and dependencies is an optional but recommended step. Here, you provide the administrator VM credentials for discovery of applications and for dependency analysis to ensure you have a successful migration. The credentials will be saved on the appliance and encrypted. This discovery process is done remotely and without any agents or scripts. But I want to continue, so I'm going to click Save and start discovery. Now, to see performance metrics, you'll need to let the process run for up to 24 hours, but a basic assessment usually takes just a couple of minutes. So let's switch back to Azure Migrate in the Azure portal. Now, I'm switching to an environment I ran earlier, get this, with over 56,000 VMs, and you can see that the information has started to flow in. In my case, we've discovered our servers and have 8 notifications. So first, I'm going to click on Assess, and that will take me to the Assess Server step. So I'm going to start by keeping the discovery source as machines discovered from Azure Migrate by default. The first thing I'm going to do now is give the assessment a name, and since this is mechanics, mechanic assessment seems like the right thing. Now I'll create a new group, and these are the servers that make up my multi-tier application. So let's go ahead, I'm going to choose the appliance name. You can see here are a few assessments I ran earlier, and you can see that my OVA appliance we just ran. Now I can choose one or more, but in my case, I'm going to keep all of them and of course my OVA. Now in my case, because I have 56,000 VMs, I'm going to scroll down and search for payroll to find the servers I want to use. After searching the 56,000 VMs, guess what? You can see, just like that, it returns the VMs we saw earlier in vSphere. You can see the web tier, app tier, and database tier. And since these are the ones I want, I'm going to go ahead and select them all. Now it's now validating the group. In the upper right-hand corner, you can see that it's been successful. And this will take me back to Azure Migrate, where I can now see that I have one group and one assessment from the previous step. So let's go ahead and drill in and take a look at the assessment. So let's go ahead and click on Assessment. And you can see, here's the mech assess we just created. If I click on this, I can see an overview of Azure Readiness with a monthly cost estimate for compute and storage. In fact, let's drill even deeper. If I click into Azure Readiness for a more detailed breakdown of specs and sizing recommendations, here's the list of VMs right here at the very bottom. And let's scroll down and take a deeper look. If I actually want to take a look at an individual VM, for example, in this case, payroll DB2, I can view the cost breakdown for this VM. And you can see, I see CPU utilization and memory utilization, disk metrics in terms of size, performance, and throughput with a monthly cost estimate. So if I go back home and click on my discovered servers, I can even see dependencies. So I'm going to go ahead and click on View Dependencies on a specific VM. And now I get a view of dependent resources to make sure that I migrate those if needed to ensure that my app will work after the migration. Here's a Linux VM. Here's the view from the client IP, all the TCP IP traffic between my servers and their dependencies. And I can click into port 443 and see the IP addresses of each server talking to this VM as well. And of course, this also works on a Windows server. So I'm going to click on Payroll DB2 server, and you can see all the ports and dependencies there as well. So I'll use this dependency information to make sure I'm migrating all the VMs I need for my app to function properly in Azure and ensure resources securely communicated over a VNet. So let's go back to our assessment and let's click on Export Assessment. And here I can download a more detailed view of this assessment. And let's go ahead and open this file. And you can see it comes right up in Excel, starting with an assessment summary that includes the project name, cost estimates, and even confidence ratings. Pretty cool. The next tab shows all assessed machines. Here you see the specifics for each assessed machine in terms of cores and how its sizing maps to Azure. The third tab shows all assessed disks with the details on storage, including cost estimates, source sizes, target sizes, and so on. These are important details for my operations and budgeting teams. Now that I've found the VMs, reviewing the sizing recommendations and projected cost, I feel good about moving to the next stage, which is the migration itself. Now before I do, let me share with you one important tip. make sure all of your Windows Server disks are discoverable. To do that, set disks on your Windows Server VMs to have a SAN policy set to Online All. Changes can be easily scripted using diskpark.exe. SAN policy equals Online All. And Linux servers won't need this step. Now, it's time to start replicating. So I've already viewed my discovered servers in the assessment tool. So I'm going to go ahead and scroll down and click on Replicate. And now, in source settings, I'll select VMware. The on-premises appliance I want is VMware 1. In virtual machines, I'll choose Yes, apply from an Azure Migrate assessment, and choose our assessment group and our assessment. Now, I need to click on the servers that I want to migrate, and by the way, you can replicate up to 100 VMs simultaneously. If you need to do more, it's recommended to do that in multiple batches. So in target settings, next, I'm going to choose standard things like my subscription, my resource group, where my VMs will reside post-migration. I'm going to select my virtual network, and of course, my Azure hybrid benefit, because I know that I have an eligible license. And now I'm going to click on Confirm and go to Compute. So here you can see the target Azure VMs are automatically populated using the assessment recommendations from earlier. Now, if you want to change the Azure VM size, you can from the dropdown. And in terms of the OS disk, typically SCSI Controller 0 ID 0 is the standard, so go ahead and use that. If we want to use availability sets already configured in the targeted resource group, which run 2 or more copies of virtual machines on separate hosts in Azure, ensuring 99.95% uptime, we can also choose those right here. So next, let's head on over to disks. And in here, we can choose which disks to replicate from our VMs. Notice that App 3 has 1 primary SCSI controller and 3 disks total, so I can select which ones I want. In my case, I'm going to keep them all selected. By the way, this is where the disk part SAN policy I just mentioned is important to ensure all source disks are visible during discovery. Now I click on Review and Start Replication. And now the selected VMs will start replicating into Azure storage. Once all your targeted virtual machines are replicated and into Azure, before you migrate them into production, you can test everything out. And I can move to the next step, testing my replicated servers. So to do that, let's go ahead and click on Replicating Servers, and let's choose the one that we want to test. Start with Payroll Web 2. Click on the ellipsis to Test Migration for the group we just migrated. Now we can make sure everything is running, networking connections and core app functionality in our case across the data, middle, and front-end tiers are all working. That's going to run a few processes. Now I'll refresh and click on the notification icon to see what's happening. You can see the process runs a prerequisite check, then prepares for the test, creates a new virtual machine, and starts it. Now this process will take a few minutes. Now, just to show what's happening, I'll look for my new VM, open my virtual machines, and you can see, of course, I have quite a few here. So to find this, I'm going to do a search here for web, and here we're going to see Payroll Web 02-test. Now we append the -test so it's clear which are test versus production, and I'll open it to see that it's running. And by the way, these VM replicas will continue replicating any changes right until you're ready to migrate into production. So let's migrate this one for real. So back in the machine replication page, I have one more thing to do. Now once you're ready for the production migration, we're going to clean up the test migrate cleanup. So we're going to go here into notes. We're going to type in a little ending note of summary and success. The testing is complete, so I'm going to click on cleanup test. You can see in the upper right-hand corner, we are going through that process of doing the cleanup, and now we're preparing for the final production migration. Now, in this time, we select Migrate, and we're going to shut down the VM, and we're going to do this to avoid any data loss and do a final replication from the source to the target. Now, you might want to do this during off-peak business hours because the VM will be down for a few minutes. So we are shutting down the virtual machine, and we have started the migration of Payroll Web 02, and you can see the operation is in progress. Now you can make any required DNS changes and ensure the user experience is running and flawless, and you can check on the progress of the migration job. Now that it's going through the production migration process, you can see we've done the prerequisites. We are in the process of shutting down the source VM. We'll then be preparing for migration, creating the Azure virtual machine, and starting the Azure virtual machine. And this will all be happening through the Azure Migrate process. And just like that, folks, we are done. So that was a quick overview of how to migrate your VMware virtual machines to Azure IaaS. Now, once your resources are in Azure, you can take advantage of Azure Cloud services, such as Azure Security Center to secure your migrated workloads, securely back up your VMs and data with Azure Backup, and leverage Azure Monitor to collect, analyze, and act on telemetry data from your Azure and on-premises environments. Of course, if you need more help, you can apply for the Azure Migration Program to get direct assistance from Microsoft and certified partners at azure.com/AMP. In fact, you can learn more about those at the playlist shown. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time on Microsoft Mechanics.